Exactly. So like 6 weeks before all the wheels came off all the buses. And so we wrapped it up, and the way we concluded was by making providing our support to the draft downtown plan that had been developed in the course of those 2 years, so that it could move into its next phase, which is that of the EIR. And technically speaking, I am not at all a technical planner, but technically speaking, what the draft downtown plan is a specific plan, an update to the specific plan for the downtown for the city of Davis. And it preceded an update to the general plan for the entire city of Davis based on decisions made by council.
All right, thanks. So starting out with the questions. So the first part of this first round is going to go to Meg, Larry, and Heather, and just basically your overall thoughts on the downtown plan and any concerns that you might have.
Well, since I was just talking, I guess I'll keep talking. As chair of the DPAC, I took my primary responsibility to be one of ensuring that the DPAC meetings themselves were ones in which all members of the committee were not just could speak, but felt welcome and encouraged to speak and to voice their opinions. We had quite a wide range of opinions on the DPAC by intention and by design, which is fabulous. And I also took my primary responsibility to be that of making sure, along with my fellow DPAC members, that the broader public process also was robust and had multiple different opportunities to, well, I mean, the city was managing the outreach process, but wanted to make sure that what the city was managing did in fact enable robust public input into the downtown plan process. And I will say that from that perspective, I was very pleased with the full suite of engagement opportunities and the number of residents of Davis who did provide their input into many different aspects of the plan.
All right, who else wants to jump in?
Go ahead, Heather.
Okay, I'm happy to. Thanks for including me today. And I was very active with Chuck Rowe on the design committee 20 years ago, just for those who didn't know. And have had my business for 33 years in downtown Davis, and very, very active until the Bromans bought my property that I used to be located in. And I think that downtown, as we know, just started to fall apart, and many businesses left or relocated. And I remember this committee existing and wanting to be part of it because of my interest in the community, and feeling like I just couldn't, because I was trying to sort of relocate and figure out if I'm going to be in Davis. And so now I'm in Davis. I'm happy to say in a very sweet spot, a block and a half away. And I've given a lot of thought to the plan that you've put a lot of time and energy and resources into. And I really am not a fan of the 7 stories. I've given a lot of thought and studied it. I respect the Rowe family and their vision. Again, I've worked very closely with them for a number of years. And they do have incredible vision, and I respect what Eric was saying. I agree with him on the no affordable housing for downtown, but I do know we need to find a happy spot of compromise, but I'm not a fan of the 7. I'm a fan of 5 stories and no higher. I think it's super important that we incorporate the use of color. I remember I gotten very active with color usage in the past and being a very important part of the vision. So I think that in order to revitalize our community, we need to really put an emphasis on bioregional color as part of the feeling and the look of our buildings and streetscape. I think that we should have a design committee that investigates a few charming communities such as Healdsburg and Mill Valley. And I already know a handful of people that would be happy to be on that committee, because I personally still would like to see Davis remain a charming community with character. And sustainability needs to be an essential part of our design considerations. And I feel that the tipping point for our community is a population of 100,000 people. And it would be my hope that that's the reach, and I'm not aware of what the reach is because I'm just getting more acquainted and up to date. But I feel very strongly that a population for the future projection of 100,000 would be what I'd like to see and know more. And so design it with these principles in mind is what I'd like to see happen.
Thank you. Larry?
Hi, thanks, Dave, for putting this on. David, sorry. And also, big thanks to Meg Arnold for chairing that committee. It was no committee is probably easy to chair. That one was a great example of a committee that's not really easy to chair. And I hope I wasn't too big a part of that. But a couple of things I wanted to respond to Eric's comments. There were actually 4 downtown property owners on the committee. So, and there were always, I think at every meeting, downtown property owners present doing public comment. So yeah. Also, as far as, costs, we keep hearing it won't pencil out. We never get to see those numbers. And while materials costs certainly have gone up, the number Eric quoted is hopefully temporary, because hopefully COVID is temporary. Hopefully, we're all hoping that. But residential rents have gone up a lot as well, and that always gets forgotten in that pencil out discussion. It was great being part of the DPAC. I have always loved our downtown since I got here in September of '94. It's been a great place. It is still a great place. It's still a vibrant place. Redevelopment and, getting more height, getting more density, and especially getting more residential downtown, I think is key. One of the things I've seen while visiting Truckee, their old downtown, it was actually fairly disturbing to me, because if you look for locals, the only place you find them is behind the counters at low-paying service jobs. And I like the fact that our downtown still has a lot of services, and kind of goods and services, in addition to retail and of course food establishments. But in addition to just liking it, it makes it a more resilient economy. And so I think a big part of the implementation of this needs to be a focus on an economic ecosystem that is downtown. And I think the city can do a lot for that. Things that we didn't discuss in the DPAC, but that can be part of the zoning. Business diversity ordinances and direct zoning or agreements with developers, redevelopers, about making space for local businesses specifically, and also how you present that space, whether it's large spaces all in one piece or in smaller pieces that promote more local and small businesses. As far as economic development, all businesses are not created equal, right? Local businesses put a lot more money into the economy, into Davis, because that money that goes to the owners of those businesses stays in the community. And so Mishka's is more valuable to Davis, economically speaking, than Starbucks. So encouraging that, I think, needs to be a big part. Another issue I have, or another issue I'd like to bring up is, and the design consultants, Opticos, mentioned this a few times, and we discussed it to some extent on the DPAC, is that at the end of the day, we're actually not talking about buildings, we're talking about people. And if we make the downtown a great place to be, then it will be successful because people will be down there. And so it's really easy to go down the rabbit hole of buildings and the minutiae because they're concrete and they're real and everybody's got experience with it. But how to make it a great place for people, for me, is a key to making it a successful plan. An example of that, and community outreach beyond just having the committee itself, Opticos came up with a really, really complicated plan for East Street Plaza going forward. Excuse me, members of the DPAC had a more simplified view and much easier to implement. And then Christopher Jones put together a whole video, and it's on YouTube and you can look it up, on a progressive redo of East Street Plaza that included walkways and green paths from all the way from the train station to Central Park, and tying that together. And that was a big thing that Opticos spoke of, was pedestrian bike paths between buildings, getting from one place to another, so that the downtown becomes a whole and can be even more vibrant because it's more interconnected. Another thing I think that's critical to a successful downtown is making it safer and more approachable in the literal and figurative sense to bicycles and pedestrians, which is a whole discussion unto itself. But anyway, I'll close off there. I was the representative of the Old East Davis Neighborhood Association in the downtown plan. And I like to think that I thought about the plan as a whole. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you, Larry. For those in attendance, as you have questions, post them in the chat, and then the second half of this, we will answer those questions. Also, my assistant had some trouble staying logged in, so hopefully she'll be able to post some of the notes that we have, including an explanation of the form-based code shortly here. And then Matt, you know, what's really interesting, and Larry brought up the issue, and as did Eric Rowe, trying to you know, understand what the fiscal difficulties are of redeveloping in the downtown. I think you can address that pretty well.
Sure. Well, happy to make a few comments on that. You know, one thing to keep in mind about this downtown plan, as well as other downtown plans that are really looking at areas that are almost entirely built out already, is that for the kind of transformation that you see in the plan to occur, it's going to require redevelopment, infill development, and so forth, to bring new buildings in different forms with different uses and so forth into the downtown area. And it's not to say that this happens all over the downtown, but in certain areas. And that is fundamentally a more challenging logistically and economically thing to do than to do new development in what we call greenfield areas. So places that are undeveloped, typically on the periphery of a community, and you're starting with somewhat of a clean slate in terms of having raw land that is priced at a certain level that reflects the lack of infrastructure, lack of improvements on the site, and so forth. And so if you think about the reuse of some of the existing buildings in downtown that are either underutilized or currently vacant, what that takes economically is for somebody to be able to come in, purchase that property, pay the property owner a sum of money that makes it worth their while to sell it. And they're looking at it, well, I've got this property, it's developed, it has a building on it, when it's occupied, it generates income and so forth. There's a value to that. And they need to be compensated in order to get them to sell it. And so that developer comes in and they need to pay that price, incorporate that into the overall project price, potentially tear the building down that exists, and figure out how to build a brand new building that kind of meets with the requirements of the plan and achieves their objectives as a developer and so forth. That costs a lot of money. And one of the examples that we gave was for the Pizza and Pints building at 3rd and B, where that piece of property sold for roughly $1 million because it had a house on it. And we know that homes in central Davis are very expensive, have a high property value. That's what it costs to obtain that property. And then it was removed and a whole new building built in its place. That's a very expensive proposition for a developer to undertake. And there are specific reasons why a developer would do that. And there are reasons that other developers wouldn't be able to make that work. And so I think that's one of the things that we just need to recognize, that development in downtown Davis has a fairly high hurdle for feasibility to start with. And then creating a project that complies with the various plan objectives and so forth, can create some additional costs and so forth. And hopefully it all pays off because somebody is buying into a downtown environment that has a lot of value as far as the completed project and the tenants who will want to be there because of all these great features that the other panelists have mentioned that make downtown Davis a desirable place to be. But it's not an easy thing to do. So with that understanding and that perspective, I think it's worthwhile to just keep that in mind, that a downtown plan is different from a financial feasibility standpoint than a greenfield specific plan area elsewhere.
Great, thanks, Matt. So for the second round of questions that I'm going to ask, I have individual questions for each panelist. I'm going to start again with Meg. Meg, can you explain the thought process of the DPAC in terms of what were the key priorities?
For the entire plan?
Yeah.
We set forth in we didn't set forth, but the draft plan, as we endorsed it, set forth a number of sort of fundamental principles, including a vibrant there was a high level vision. There is a high level vision, and then with a number of principles beneath it. Those principles were and the high level strategy were hashed out over the entire 2-year period, I would say, although principally in the beginning, because then they built the details around those high level principles. And they included things like some of the things Larry mentioned, including walkability and bike access. They include sustainability. Absolutely, we had a very, very strong sustainability set of inputs into the plan, including a whole host of things that were led by members of DPAC themselves, working in the subcommittee. Accessible to all people, all ages, all mobility levels. There was a strong universal access component that I will say did come in a little bit late to the process, but was brought very strongly to the DPAC in a meeting that I can't remember, but can't place in time, by a couple of Davis residents that we very greatly appreciated coming forward. So, the thought process was, I think of DPAC as being very strongly attuned to the public input that we were getting, both in the very many outreach oriented sessions and as well in our meetings. And so our thought process was to debate and discuss, and then also, and very significantly, to go back to what it was that we all thought we were hearing from others in the community about the various points.
Great, thank you. Larry, what concerns do you have as president of a neighborhood association about issues like density, parking, and transitions?
Yeah, obviously, the transitions part is big. There are 4 properties within our neighborhood that are included in the downtown planning area, and there are others that will be kind of up for consideration in the general plan update. And those properties are, most of them, not all of them, are adjacent to single-story historic homes, and putting really large buildings next to those, we feel, and I think history bears this out pretty well, the Historic Resource Management Commission also agreed that would endanger those properties' viability as to be maintained. And as you know, or as you may know, may not know, I don't know. Anyway, when the first of those parcels, the trackside parcel, was originally proposed for redevelopment, then our neighborhood put forth a plan, or at least a rough building design that, when we ran the numbers, it pencils out anyway. And we've said all along that we are not opposed to redevelopment of those sites, and we've been active with the city, and in fact changing the zoning to multi-use. We'd like to see them redeveloped. We're really concerned about the historic resources in the neighborhood for the long term. Personally, I think having a sense of history and a sense of who you are is pretty important in a community. The parking impacts, our neighborhood has pretty heavy parking impacts as it is, and we have parking districts to try and mitigate that. We're working with the city right now on a plan to, for instance, increase the number of X permits in our neighborhood, and to designate more of those parking sites within our neighborhood. Traffic is difficult, and we're also working with the city right now on kind of traffic calming measures. One of the good things about our streets is that they're really wide, and we can have 2 ways of traffic and bicycles, and I can be getting out of my car and not worrying, there's plenty of room for that. The problem with that is it's a big wide open street, and so people go fast all the time, and we have a lot of accidents. And using either 4th Street or 3rd Street to be kind of a primary corridor is definitely desirable in some sense, but it also increases the number of users, but more importantly, the number of people who use it, I don't know, incorrectly, if that's the right term, basically who are driving really fast. So trying to mitigate those effects with traffic calming measures, I think is really key. And throughout the downtown, I think that's key. We had several, the DPAC had several people participate who said, riding a bike downtown is nice and all, but it's scary. And so designing the streets so that they can be shared safely. And here the key is not number safety, that's a key, but perception is also key. So that's pretty much a question of design. And so design, it seems to me that design actually doesn't get the status it should, because it is super important in how things are used. So that was kind of bleeding off from our neighborhood into the downtown specifically, but.
Well, thanks, Larry.
Mhm.
Heather, I know in your initial answer, you listed off a bunch of concerns that you had. But I was wondering if you could address the issue of parking and concerns thereabouts. Parking is always really a big issue, especially for business owners, because they need to get their customers to their store. So what concerns do you have there?
Well, I think that in the reinvention of downtown Davis, you know, we missed the opportunity years ago, as many people know, in terms of making it happen. And now we're trying to figure out how to make it work with, you know, the possibility of more underground parking, I think is actually probably attractive in the right locations. And I've always been a fan of 3-hour for the street parking, by the way, but it hasn't been put into place. And I think that's a great question. It's always one of the hardest ones to answer. And you know, how do we design in a manner that's going to provide enough parking to be comfortable in our flow dynamics? I still like the idea of more parking on the edges versus too centralized. And that's always been, you know, I like the idea of walking and things of that nature. And of course, that's an essential part of design for how we proceed. But I can't claim I'm an expert on the question you just asked, but I do think that the property developers, you know, obviously need to be encouraged to put the right amount of parking in place, and the policies all need to be really looked at in relationship to parking.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
And Matt, the issue of affordable housing has been brought up, but you know, it seems like every project that we see, you know, the council and the planning commission both seem to want to put affordable housing in. Is that going to work in the downtown, or what's the issue there?
Yeah, well, I think for the reasons that I mentioned previously about just the inherent challenges of doing infill and redevelopment, it's very difficult to get a project to pencil out when it's all market rate, for example. And as much as I personally and my firm are strong advocates for affordable housing and think that the downtown area would be a really great place where residents of affordable housing could benefit from being there and the access that it provides. I think from a practical standpoint, the financial feasibility of doing that as a, you know, like mixed income residential projects right now under current conditions, and really under the conditions that we've seen in downtown over the last, you know, probably at least decade or more, is going to be very difficult to do. And so, you know, I would hope that the plan, and I think it does provide the opportunity for sites where housing can be built. Potentially somebody could come in and access some subsidy funds and do a project that has some affordable housing. That'd be very beneficial for the downtown as well as for residents that could live in that area. But requiring that as a component of market rate projects right now doesn't seem to be workable because of these cost issues.
Thank you. All right, so a final round of questions, and this one is going to go to pretty much everyone who wants to address it. The proposed plan reflects, we think, probably at least 2 years of work and probably several years even before that of just general thinking prior to the pandemic. And now we have a pandemic which has the potential to change a lot of things going forward. Should we start incorporating some of these concerns into the plan before we pass the plan and kind of codify that?
So one of the things, David, when you and I were talking about this session, before the session, when you were shaping it, was, I was really clear about my really deep hesitancy to speculate about the long-term impacts, frankly, to anything, including our downtown, of the pandemic that we're all living through. Although it has been 7 months that feel like 18 or 20 years, it's still not clear what the long-term structural changes are that we're likely to see as a result. I mean, we can read articles every day about people who are never going to go back in the office and people who can't wait to go back in the office. And as soon as they can, it will all resume, life exactly as it has been. Or as soon as we have the vaccine, life will resume in a far different way than we have ever understood it to be. And it's, I'm not trying to punt this question, but it feels, especially as in my role as just a person who happens to live in Davis and happened to chair a committee that is now over with, with no particular expertise on long-term structural impacts of pandemics, I worry a lot about saying anything because I probably don't know very much. On the other hand, we have proof before us over the last 7 months of the devastation and hardship that what we've been going through is creating. I mean, the organization that pays my salary just published our second COVID-19 resilience poll specific to the Capital Region. And it found that 47% of residents in the Capital Region have experienced either a somewhat or a significant reduction of income since the pandemic. Unemployment overall amongst those respondents in January was 8%, as of September was 17%. Enormous racial and ethnic disparities, an enormous burden by age as well. Those who are 18 to 38 are struggling far more significantly with all sorts of issues, including unemployment, and including also having kids at home, because if you're 18 to 38, which I am no longer, you are likely to have younger kids than people like me, and they need more time and attention. And, I'm not trying to not answer the question, because obviously there are really, really unique and powerful and never before experienced things that are happening in our community and across our country as a result of all of this. And yet at the same time, if we get a vaccine next June and it actually is scalable and actually is broadly and fairly swiftly implemented, I would hate to have gone and changed a 20-year plan for the future of Davis, sort of without needing to have done so. So that's my kind of high level take on that question.
I appreciate that. And, not trying to be unfair, but that is the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
It's the 800-pound gorilla for everybody. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
All right. Who else wants to give their thoughts on this?
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in, and I think I would support Meg's perspective in that it would be overly speculative to make some sort of a change in the plan that's reactive specifically to COVID-19 concerns without really understanding what kind of long-term implication that might have, or the concern may not have. And just to keep in mind that, you know, all planning has to be done at a certain point in time. And the reason we do updates is because things change, unforeseen circumstances occur, priorities change, and what have you. So I think you do the best you can at the time with the information you do have available, and make the plan, and then just commit to making adjustments as necessary when you see what happens later in the future. And there could be something completely different that none of us are foreseeing right now that becomes an even bigger impact. So, you know, on the one hand, we say we want to create this plan to give some certainty, some predictability to the development outcomes in the downtown area. And that's great. And I think the plan, you know, strives to do that. But we also have to recognize that it's bound to be necessary to make changes in the future. So just having a commitment to revisit it periodically and make those adjustments as necessary is probably important.
Thanks, Matt. Larry or Heather want to jump in?
I'll jump in. So when I became very frustrated with how Davis was feeling and the disconnect that I was letting people know I was witnessing prior to my move about 5 years ago, prior to the Brinley building selling, I came up with reaching out online and learning about other communities, and discovered Quint Studer's work. I'll flash a book called Building a Vibrant Community. And I became engaged with his network out of Florida and Pensacola, and he's considered a community building guru. And his team has been supporting me and trying to help support the city of Davis. And I do feel that we're looking to get more people engaged, and I'm delighted with the work that's been done with this committee. I wasn't in a position to be engaged until I got my new business situated, and I'm doing what I can now to help the vision. And I think that that's offering an opportunity to get people more engaged. So I've proposed a book club for the city of Davis in the new year. I have lots of books available. A lot of people have purchased this book to get a conversation going and to raise the civic IQ. And so I'm inviting that to be part of this journey, inviting a pause to happen, because I do think the pause is needed and the times are calling for it. So that's kind of where I am coming from.
Great. And I just want to remind the audience that after Larry goes, we are going to start taking audience questions. Some of them have already been responded to in the chat, which is good. But if you want to throw more into the chat, please do so, because we have another almost 40 minutes to go. So lots of time for questions. Larry, you want to weigh in here?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I always want to weigh in. Part of the problem Meg had to deal with. So I think the thing is, again, so COVID, this is a 40-year plan, and I would actually rather try and think on the 100-year time scale. One of the things I liked about many of the city centers I've been in Europe is those are 600 years old. So they didn't have refrigeration or cars. So talk about a transportation and a business paradigm shift. They have survived that well, and they've survived it well because of placemaking, because they're still great places to be. So COVID has specific issues with it, but there will always be crises. And as someone pointed out, I think Greg Rowe pointed out, and this is not going to be the last infectious disease outbreak. So some of these specific things might work. But the key, I think, going forward is, again, resiliency in the economic ecosystem of our downtown. And this was really borne in by the COVID pandemic, is that if you put all your eggs in one basket, if our downtown is only a destination downtown and is reliant on tourism, that is great as long as the economy is great. But the economy takes a hit, and tourist-based economies go down. They go down hard because it's not essential spending. So having a lot of people living downtown and having goods and services downtown that cater to Davisites is important. This, I'm sure people love to, we're a very black and white culture. This does not mean we shouldn't have tourist attraction or you know, try and actively attract tourism downtown. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying having an economy that's solely based on that is really hazardous. It also really increases the economic disparity. If everybody in Davis is a service worker, then right, the economy is bad as well. So the city doing what it can do, and there is a lot, by the way, the city can do to encourage small local businesses. Again, it helps our economic issues in the city. It helps the community. It builds community, and it is a more resilient economy overall. So I really think in the implementation of the downtown, that needs to be a priority, and I think it has a lot of benefits, including surviving a crisis like our current pandemic.
Well, thank you, Larry. So that concludes the formal questions. You know, and I think, you know, this was obviously the last question was obviously tough, but you know, that's really what we're dealing with. And I think one of the hard things is that on the one hand, we're in this great unknown period, but on the other hand, we can't like stop everything that we're doing and wait for this period to clear, because nobody has any idea how long that's going to be. And so that really, you know, when we're dealing with big plans, you know, and this is one of them, you know, DISC is another one. These are big issues that we're facing, and we're having to make these decisions in the middle of great uncertainty. And so that definitely makes it very difficult. All right, so we're going to start taking questions from the audience, and I'm going to introduce Layla, one of our many excellent interns, and she's helping out today. So Layla, you want to read out the first question?
Hi there. Yeah, sure. So the first question we have that I don't believe has been answered yet in the chat is the former 3rd Davis Ace Hardware building has been vacant and for sale for some time with no apparent interest. Does this portend difficulty in developing and transforming downtown Davis?
Well, that's a good question. Who wants to?
I'll dive in just, you know, with some commentary. So I, you know, for that property as well as some other properties in the downtown area, occasionally I do get contacted by people with development interest just because they're aware that I've worked on the plan. They're aware that I've had my office in downtown Davis since 1995 and so forth. And there are people that have serious interests in these properties, but a big question for them is, you know, what am I going to be able to do on this property, and what else is going to happen in the rest of the downtown area? So, you know, I think with the questions about, well, you know, what's the plans under development? What's that ultimately going to be? That's had some people on the sidelines just waiting to see what the plan will lay out. Pandemic, of course, has caused people to put a pause on things to wait to see how that's going to pan out. So I wouldn't necessarily look at what's happening in the downtown area right now as being indicative of the future. I think as some of these questions get cleared up moving forward, then that's going to open the way for people to feel they have reassurance to move forward with certain plans. I will say that in almost all those conversations, there's been at least a hint of, well, how dense of a building could I build in this area? And I think it's, again, the developers are sort of doing this math in their head of saying, okay, what am I going to need to do in terms of getting new square footage or new housing units in order to make a project like this work based on what the property owner is asking for the property. So there is a lot of question about those things. Once the plan is set, then perhaps that creates the certainty and the clarity of what will be allowed. And this potentially could work in both ways, where property owners also have a new set of expectations on what the property will support in terms of development. And so with some of that cleared up, maybe we'll see some things starting to happen. Again, the Ace Hardware property, that's a unique piece of property. Somebody has to figure out, can they do an adaptive reuse there, or do they start over and do something completely new? That's a complicated process. The property is configured in a certain way with the public parking in front, and that makes things more complicated as well. So it's, I guess there's no such thing as an easy development project in downtown Davis, probably. And so we should expect to see these things happen slowly over time, not in some sort of a tsunami of development activity.
Thanks. Anyone else want to jump in on that, Larry?
Go ahead, Meg.
Well, actually, I was going to jump in on something that was a comment in chat, a little back and forth between yourself and Kelsey. But so go ahead, Larry. I think I'm off topic.
Yeah, David. So I think, yeah, what Matt's talking about is that was one of the big purposes of doing the DPAC, is to give certainty, because the cost of a parcel is based on its potential, right? It's not set in stone. It is what you can make of it. And once definitive zoning is established for each parcel, then the worth of that parcel becomes also stabilized. One of the issues people have had is that the current zoning in downtown is pretty restrictive. And so, planned developments, exceptions to the zoning are feasible. You don't know what those exceptions, and you don't know the limit of those exceptions. And so it becomes this kind of speculative game. And so one of the things I really like about the downtown plan, or having a downtown plan that is viable, is giving the community and developers and property owners just more stability and certainty. And yeah, the market, once things are certain, the market determines the cost of the property.
Yeah, I'd echo that about certainty. We had a number of discussions at DPAC throughout the 2 years about the merits of simply creating greater certainty for everyone, all of the stakeholders involved in downtown: residents, business owners, property owners, frankly, the city staff, city commissions, from a process perspective. And because with uncertainty, with increased uncertainty, that just comes increased cost of time, cost of resources, opportunity cost, et cetera. And so that was one of the real kind of bedrock principles that or advantages that I think pretty much everybody on DPAC was motivated to try to accomplish.
Thanks.
Can I make a small note about the thing I was typing something in the chat, responding to Kelsey's question about does the downtown plan encourage local businesses? Can I just go there briefly?
Sure.
And Larry replied by noting that he didn't know of any specific policies in the downtown plan that encourage local businesses, and I would agree with that. The downtown plan, for the reason that the downtown plan is about the future physical development of Davis. It is for people, but the plan deals in form-based code, which is about buildings and structures. We had a number of conversations throughout, almost from the first meeting of DPAC, about the fact that the city does not have a clearly identified economic development plan. And it is in the confines or the context of an economic development plan that you would find policies intended to encourage local businesses or intended to not encourage local businesses, whatever the case may be. You know, I'm a really strong supporter and proponent of locally owned businesses for all of the reasons including those we've mentioned here today. But I did find, I mean, a large part of my career in this community, in this region, has been in economic development in one shape or form over the years. So it was frustrating to know that our mandate and our scope was insufficient to also, it was not designed in order to tackle the economic development aspect of things.
All right.
So
Heather?
yeah, I do feel that the solution is to really look at the zoning and the, way it serves our small businesses and implement some programs that will encourage small businesses to open or stay here. Because I noticed when I was trying to do my changes that none of these existed. And so I, do feel that that's what's missing in terms of resilience, so that there is a way for the balancing act of small businesses to be part of the landscape along with the larger businesses. And we seem to do a really good job of that, when Ken Hyatt was involved. And I think that there were city staff that were more actively engaged in the support of small business. And so I do feel that that is a void and an area that needs to be looked at.
Great. All right. Layla, you want to read another question?
Yeah, sure. So the next question is, books like Deadliest Enemy, Our War Against Germs, and The Coming Plague by Laurie Garrett make the point that the current COVID-19 pandemic is likely to be just the first in a series of future pandemics and epidemics. This is greatly related to the large and growing global population and easy transmission through global travel. So it may very well make sense to build that kind of assumption to the downtown plan. For example, how likely will large public gatherings be?
Go ahead.
I'll go for that.
Yeah.
They'll be very likely some of the time, I guess, is what I would say. And so this, one of the things I think COVID can teach us is that because of the specifics of, not of COVID specifically, but of, infectious disease outbreaks, is at least to think about that when we are planning, especially our open spaces. Well, actually, no, specific, maybe also our closed spaces. So planning for, this is going to go away, something else will come back, but having big open spaces where lots of people can gather is a good thing, and people like it, right? Saturday farmers market, Wednesday market, people love them. I love them, a lot of people love them. But what saved us and saved some of the businesses downtown, I think, is having open space and in fact spilling out into public space and kind of allowing businesses to use that space temporarily. So, and we happen to live in California, or not happen to, we all chose more or less to live here. So we've got great weather, you know, 364.5 days a year. So having outdoor spaces turns out to not just be really nice emotionally, but it turns out to be very effective at using space and continuing business and continuing community engagement when there are infectious disease outbreaks specifically.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Heather.
I mean, my business, I feel so fortunate that it has been allowing me to be adapting with the front patio, for instance, and for me to be able to set up a dressing room outside in certain instances and to just have more creative opportunities. And yes, I think that's a fascinating question, and one that obviously we're going to need a little time as a community to be really giving consideration to. But I appreciate the question and the opportunity to help the design of our community be inspired by it.
I was just going to add that, I think one of the features of the form-based code is that there is some flexibility about how those spaces are actually used that, different from traditional zoning where we say in this zoning district, these are the allowed uses and these are the unallowed uses, that it's more about the function and the activity and so forth. And so if the form-based code is successful in providing flexibility for the adaptation of spaces, so maybe we'll have a situation where over the long term, we realize that certain types of activities that happen in the downtown aren't really viable or can't really happen the way they used to. But if the building envelopes that are there have flexibility to accommodate adaptation, then that can be a really beneficial resilience feature, I think, for the downtown area. So I'm encouraged that we may be moving in a direction where we have that ability for more nimbleness. And I would just, looking at the downtown right now as it is, really commend the city for being able to rise the occasion and make it possible for all of these little parklets and so forth, the dining pads out in front of the businesses to happen. It seems like people are able to do it in a relatively inexpensive way, quickly. There seem to be popping up. And again, having that sort of nimbleness in the process for reviewing and approving these kinds of things to happen in the downtown is probably something that also bodes well for the future if we can kind of maintain that kind of can-do attitude to, we have a problem, we need to figure out a way to adapt. We know there may be some issues with it, not being a perfect solution, but let's give it a try and see what we can do. So I think these things, show a nice direction that the downtown's going.
All right. Do we want to go on to another question? All right, Layla, you're up.
Ooh, all right, sorry. So here is a question that's developed a little bit of discussion in the chat, and I think it might be helpful to kind of have everyone to have the chance to talk about it over the video. So while the plan wants to prioritize bike and pedestrian access, there is a real disconnect in the planning that doesn't recognize the need for trucks, vans, and other delivery vehicles to service the businesses and residents of downtown. How can the plan be modified to support these necessary delivery services?
Who wants to go? Go ahead.
Okay. So quite a while ago, I guess there was an idea put forward to close off E Street between second and third to pedestrian only. And my understanding was that that was actually that some of the downtown businesses or the DDBA kind of put the brakes on that. But in fact, I was talking to someone from the DDBA and they said, well, actually, no, the DDBA was cool with it, or the downtown businesses were cool with it. And I shouldn't use those interchangeably because they're not the same. But it was that the fire department had access issues, and so my point, and I do have one, is that that's the same issue, I think, in this question, is access for bigger trucks. Again, going back to places that have done this, just because something is primarily pedestrian doesn't mean you can't have access. So my thing was, so was the answer no, just because the fire department said we're going to have issues? Like, shouldn't the answer? So John Meyer several times in the downtown plan said, instead of asking, can we do this? Why don't we just ask, how can we do this? And it's not just a word difference, right? It's an entire mindset difference. So if access to emergency vehicles or delivery vehicles is an issue, okay, can we close it off to primary traffic and just have delivery vehicles access to delivery and or emergency vehicles? That doesn't actually seem very difficult to me. And again, going back to that old European model, cities built before automobiles, they did that. There were cars going through all the time. It was crowded with pedestrians, and a delivery truck would come through, and because it was crowded with pedestrians, it would come through at about 5 miles an hour, or 2 kilometers per hour. And people got out of the way and they stopped and unloaded the truck and loaded the store, got back in the truck and wandered out. It wasn't an either or, it was an accommodation because of a necessity. And so again, thinking it's got to be either or really gets you into trouble, and trying to say, how can we solve the problem is a much better approach.
Yeah, I like what you said, Larry. And I remember being on committees where this was being brought up 20 years ago or more. And I remember always saying, I don't know how to answer the question, so I won't. But we're in the times of answering the question now. And I think that the little parklets that have sprouted up in response to the virus are working, like Matt said, and we have been learning how to be creative with the times. We've learned that closing down a portion of G Street for, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or whatever days seems to be working, at least over the last several months. So I think having more adaptable plans is what I support. I never could relate to the E Street being it. And I'm coming to realize that my conclusion for the now is that, let's stay adaptable and make it possible for deliveries, but have the ability to close down a portion of our downtown, which we seem to be noticing G Street seems to be the most successful closure.
I know during the some of the charrette process, I did see sketches that showed these what they called shared street areas, where you could have nice landscaping to make it attractive for pedestrians and bicyclists and so forth. But there would also be space where a delivery truck could pull in and get out of the main travel way and do a loading and unloading and so forth. So not sure exactly how that got translated into the plan itself, but it seemed like there were solutions that were, able to kind of navigate that balance between what you're trying to accomplish with pedestrian and bicycle friendliness, but also providing the vehicular access. And I think it's, a lot of it is about controlling the speeds to make it so that, to the extent that there are vehicles on these streets, they're not a hazard or a danger or an impediment to the bicycles and pedestrians, so they feel comfortable being there as well. Kind of resetting the balance or the hierarchy of the road users, if you will.
I will be interested to see how this works when we get cold and wet. We've managed pretty well with smoky, windy, and hot, which is sometimes a little surprising given how smoky it was. So yeah, it's really interesting. Did anyone else want to weigh in, or should we go to the next question? All right, Layla.
All right, next question. So what are the sustainability elements in the downtown plan? How are these elements going to be implemented? And how does the plan carry out potential elements of the forthcoming climate action and adaptation plan?
So part of the reason I was a little bit distracted during the last question and discussion is because I was finding the place in the downtown plan that that speaks to the sustainability elements in it, which happens to be on page 40, section 3.3, called Sustainability Themes in the Specific Plan. We had an ad hoc subcommittee of the DPAC that came together after either the first or the second big charrette process. And I included some committee members as well as some non-committee members who wanted to be involved in the discussion. And they did an amazing amount of work in a really short period of time and came up with a very long list of things that could be done in the downtown. I think there were about 80, if not more. And the sustainability consultant, who was part of the consulting team, was both very impressed by this list and also very strongly counseled the city that the list needed to be further fleshed out in terms of cost benefit and overall impact, and then also prioritized. So the way that work ended up getting embedded into the plan itself is by identifying what the plan calls 10 sustainability themes, which begin to be discussed on page 40. I'll just run through them really quickly. Social equity, resilient economy, quality of life, living landscape, education, energy, mobility, water, waste, and food. So those were the 10 themes. And the long laundry list of potential actions, to my recollection, had for each of the items on the laundry list identified which of the 10 themes it spoke to, and it wasn't just one. It was usually many, which is good. So the rest of the document in the plan here sort of illustrates examples of how sustainability can be built in different ways at different scales in the plan, from district level scale implementation down to single project development implementation, and all sorts of different examples. In that process of the DPAC and putting this draft plan together, we did not have I think probably the time frame or the resources to make sure that long laundry list of 80 some odd implementation actions actually did get vetted and prioritized, or further quantified and prioritized in terms of impact. And so that work, at least to my knowledge, remains TBD. And I think a really, really good next step for the city of Davis would be to undertake that prioritizing with as much citizen or resident input as possible, wanting to come out with something that is informed and, again, quantified and tangible in terms of priorities.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else want to weigh in on that, or should we push on? Looks like, oh, no, go ahead, Larry.
Just real quickly. Yeah. So I was part of the subcommittee. Also, I note Richard McCann was part of that subcommittee who was not on the downtown plan committee, and I don't know of anybody else. But yeah, it was very much downtown plan committee and community. And it was right. We have phenomenal experts in our community in basically every facet of life. And so the community engagement going forward really, really, really needs to be included as this plan goes forward. It can't be done because we have so many resources in the community that can make this, that can push this plan over the top. That really needs to happen. So just to.
Great, thanks. All right, try to get to 2 more questions here in our remaining time. And thanks to the panel for coming out today and sharing your lunch hour. And to the audience, we've lost a bunch of the audience, but we had a pretty good showing. So really pleased about that. Layla, you want to ask the next question?
So that's all the questions I have for right now, but if anyone else wants to post any more questions in the chat.
All right, anyone else want to post one more quick question in the chat? I'll see if I can come up with a quick question to ask while we're waiting to see.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Because I'm still getting familiar and updated, is there a population projection for this plan?
There was a detailed economic background. Is that what they called it? Larry, I can't remember, that actually we were given as sort of the first set of documentation that we had to familiarize ourselves with the content and the context in which we were going to be working. So I believe there are population projections, including by age, band, and other factors, although I honestly, at this particular moment, can't remember exactly what they were.
I think in the message, the email from the city about the scoping meeting, I actually think they had that in there. I was just going to look it up real quick.
I was just curious because it obviously affects everything, and how, you know, everyone's hopefully agreeing on that number. And yeah.
Yes, for sure. I'm just flipping through the plan right now to the front end of it.
As part of the background work, we did look at long-term projections for the city, made some estimates of potential capture rate of housing in the downtown area. But I think what Larry's referring to is maybe the growth assumptions that are assumed for the purposes of the environmental impact report for the plan, which can be different in that the plan wants to provide a certain envelope of development capability that will adequately provide for foreseeable development within the downtown. So that number may well be different, and it could be a higher number than what we had projected. And the purpose of that would be to say, you know, in the event that we have more interest in downtown housing development than anticipated, we want to make sure that the EIR for this plan can accommodate that without having to go back out and revise the EIR and so forth. So it's certainly worth looking at if you have an interest in some of the ideas about what the development potential is within the downtown. As envisioned by the plan.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we got one more question here. Go ahead.
All right, so this is from the chat. Certainty is what we thought we were accomplishing when we put together the downtown and historical neighborhood design guidelines. But as soon as someone wanted to develop a property outside of these plans, they just went to the city and found a process to go around that certainty. And we were told that the guidelines were just guidelines or were out of date, etc. So how does this process guarantee this goal of certainty? And you can look back in the chat if you want to refer to it.
So I'll jump in to start. Part of what this plan does is it replaces a number of different and sometimes confusing, if not outright conflicting, existing documents that in their overlay amongst themselves create confusion and potential for misunderstanding, and then potential for increase the likelihood of kind of, I can't remember, where's the word here, just going to the city to for clarity or for to try to move something forward. So part of what this plan is intended to do is to strip away all of those confusing overlays and create in a single body, with references where necessary to other things, but in a single body, that clarity about what is and is not permissible. And I think that's part of it. Honestly, I will say, this is my this whole thing has been just me talking, but this is really just me talking. Part of what needs to happen in order to create certainty is for city staff and city electeds to go by the things that eventually get implemented, and to be backstopped, and frankly, for city staff to feel empowered to be able to, that they will be backstopped in having done that. And that requires the citizens or the residents of Davis to honor and respect the processes that are put in place and how they get followed.
All right, I was going to wrap it up on that, but Greg Rowe asked a really good question. So Layla, one last question.
All right, so this last one is, in the absence of redevelopment funds, how fiscally realistic is the downtown plan?
So
I think that's you.
I'll jump in for sure. So as I said earlier, I think that, the plan is going to be something that happens incrementally over time. And so we're going to see opportunities arise for people who own property or people to purchase property and do a project here and there, and to make it work. And I don't expect that there's going to be this landslide of activity, although I think maybe there's a little bit of pent-up activity. Again, as I mentioned, people kind of waiting on the sidelines until they get a clearer picture of what the plan's going to do. So if the economy's on the upswing before too long, maybe we'll see some initial burst of activity with some projects. But this is the nature, again, of redevelopment and infill within an already developed areas. That things don't just happen overnight. It takes time, and it really takes a lot of dedication on the part of developers that have a vision for how they can accomplish what they need to accomplish within the plan itself. But everything that we heard from speaking with developers and developers, community, stakeholder representatives, and so forth throughout this process was this big challenge with we just need to know what the ground rules are going to be. We need to have a clear picture of what it is that's expected of us and what we're going to be able to do, and then we can plan projects accordingly. And so I do believe that will help. And hopefully we'll set things up for some things to happen, but it's not going to be a landslide of activity all at once.
All right, Larry, quickly.
Yeah, one of the ways I would answer that, Greg, is it did happen, so it can happen. The Arbors building was just built. In fact, it was wrapping up as the DPAC was meeting. Eric Rowe's got a building that's not that old. Steve Sherman's got a project that's in the works downtown. It happens because people solve problems and they make it happen. And again, specificity is going to give more, it gives more certainty, which means that, you know, property values will reflect that. And so pizza and pints, yeah, we all scratched our head. Even Randy Jackson scratched his head. How do you buy $1 million property and build a 1-story house like pizza thing? Well, they did. Well, he didn't, you know, he did buy it. Yeah. So if it did happen, it can happen. And I have to give that quote to Rob Twist, my thesis advisor.
All right. Anyone else want to jump in real quickly? We're pretty much out of time here. All right, then on that note, I want to once again thank everybody for coming out. Thank you, panel, for this great discussion. Hopefully this gets the city on the right track for its discussion that's going to roll out over the coming days, weeks, months, hopefully not years. So thank you all, and have a good day.
Thanks for organizing, David.
Yeah, thanks
So
a lot.
much.
Thank
you
you
all.
very
You
much.
guys.
Great talking with everyone. Appreciate the opportunity.